Welcome to the final episode of Art Chats 2023, ending this wonderful year with a guest who literally needs no introduction, the phenomenal concept designer, illustrator, and teacher, John Park. John's body of work is one that has found itself in the visual libraries of countless aspiring students and experienced artists working in the field, and it was truly an honor to host him and hear about his journey and thoughtful insights about art and design education. Not to forget, we also spend a significant amount of time fanboying over our mutual silent art mentors such as Greg Mullins and Jamie Jones. John is not only an incredible artist, but also a very passionate teacher, and he takes us through his journey of building one of the best design institutions in the world, known as Brainstorm School. Before we jump into this episode, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell to stay updated on all the exciting content we have lined up. Don't miss out on future episodes where we unravel the secrets of the creative process and bring more news and thoughts about building a truly fulfilling creative career. Without further ado, let's dive into the final episode of 2023, episode number 8 with John Park and your host Ayan DC. Let's begin. I'll tell you, I remember the time when I started off working in the industry, and at that point, I only knew 3 people that I wanted my work to look like. One was you, the other was Jamie Jones, and the third one was Greg Mullins. That was my entire visual library.
You can't put me on the list on the same category as those guys. Those guys
you are definitely on that level. I mean because I grew up seeing old masters paintings, and I never thought that kind of work had a place in the industry where creative problem solving is more of a priority than making pretty pictures. And seeing you guys really hold the baton on bringing that level of aesthetic into actual design solutions really opened my eye a lot. So firstly, I would like to say thank you so much for being that person, and really excited to have you.
Oh, well, no, thank you so much for syncing up and connecting with me. It's always awesome to connect with another fellow artist. And yeah, I'd love to talk about, art, life, everything. So yeah, I'm down, anything that I could provide some sort of insight, I'm more than happy to share.
Absolutely. Because and I also want to point out for whoever's going to watch this, you actually very humbly allowed me to, or at least humbly accepted the idea that you could even paint while we talk. But I kind of want to keep that away, mostly because I'm so aware of your work, everyone does, but I want to get into conversations a little away from just the craft of this work and more into the business side of things, because you hold multiple roles at this point, because I see you as an artist on the forefront of the current design trend as well, with the amazing project that you worked on. You're also an amazing teacher. I followed your tutorials for 6-7 years now. I followed your interviews so regularly, and also as trends start changing within the industry, I've seen you take that up. So that adaptability is also something which I find very interesting about you. So I had questions as to questions about you as a human being more than just simply an artist. And so that's why I'm like, okay, we'll keep the painting things aside a little bit, but because most of the people who watch these episodes, they will be very much aware of who you are, and they're very much familiar with your work.
I really appreciate that, Ayan. I don't mind I guess talking while painting, but I notice when I'm really into the painting, I forget what I'm talking about. Right. So I'll start talking about random things, and I'm like, what are we talking about again?
Right. So, exactly.
I do appreciate that.
No, absolutely. And also the thing is that because now, even this is something I heard from other guests as well, and it's very obvious that podcasts like these get a little repetitive as well, because you can't you won't be able to say too much about the craft aspect of this work, because at this point we've kind of realized how like the process towards becoming a great technical artist, right? Like it's hours of practice. You expand your visual library, you study things, and you understand how design works. And with hours of practice and just fine tuning that, working with professionals, you get better at the craft.
Yeah,
The
exactly.
intention towards this endeavor has been mostly about seeing what's next for artists in this field, essentially. And
Yeah,
the conversation also has come to a point where we see that the development in the industry and for artists happens on a technological level a lot more than on
yep,
a human psychological level, because
yeah,
obviously technology will develop constantly. Every year we see some kind of an update that's happening.
yeah,
So
absolutely.
having veterans like you comment on that factor really helps to at least establish what the conversation is within the industry as well,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Um, yeah, I guess we can start. I mean, would you I guess I could share a little background of how I got into the industry
Absolutely,
and
absolutely.
what it was like when I started. Um, so I started Art Center back in 2006,
Right.
and prior to that, I was in community college building my portfolio to get into the college. So it's a design school based in California, really prestigious, really great school. And a lot of the requirements for what in order to get in was really based on the foundation skills and really just on traditional hand drawing skills.
Right.
So a lot of my work comprised of paper, like drawings on paper with marker and ink,
Mhm.
and and that was basically my entire medium that I used for my portfolio.
Right.
I went into college with the emphasis of industrial design. So I didn't know about designing in films and video games until after I got into Art Center.
I see.
And so I wanted to design things like, like cell phones and mouses and keyboards and things like that,
Right.
like
So you joined as
more,
a product designer, that means. Product
yeah,
design school. Yeah.
exactly.
Right.
Product design. And I realized very, very quickly that it's way too difficult for me.
Right.
It's very technical and I love it. I
Mhm.
learned a lot from it, but there was a component which I felt I really wanted to do more storytelling
Mhm.
and world building. And I felt that product design was more on the manufacturing side and
Right.
and it was very, very much focused on consumer sentiment, on the consumer side of things,
Right.
ergonomics, spaces, and functionality, which I think is incredible.
Yep.
Um, so I went to Art Center and one of my first teachers, the first day I
Mhm.
started in school was Scott Robertson, and he
Wow.
was the person who changed it all for me. He was my
Mhm.
mentor from day one, and I really owe my my career to him. He's one of the main reasons why I'm here today. I have three mentors in my life, and
Mhm.
and he's definitely one of the core pillars. And so he really introduced a lot of the importance of foundation drawing,
Right.
perspective, and design. And I was very comfortable with that, learning it, and everything was just on paper and using pen and marker and pencils and things like that. So it was pretty straightforward until they started to implement Photoshop into the curriculum. And
Oh, wow.
Photoshop
Okay.
to me was like a really cool thing, but it felt very it was still very niche and it wasn't as popular when I was going to school. I've seen other people and other professionals
Right.
do it, but at least as a student, it was kind of a brand new thing.
Right.
And it scared me initially, Ian, because I practiced traditionally on paper with
Right.
tangibly, like I could feel the paper, feel the pencil. I used to have this like really big callus on my finger because I used to draw so much.
Wow.
And
Okay.
I was like, wow, I have to now switch to a tablet, and there was a big disconnect. And that's kind of where I understood. I was like, oh, whoa, in this field, adaptability is a big key component. But I felt it was so difficult for me to make that switch because everything that I practiced was more using physical, mediums. And
Right.
so to make that switch, it took me a long time. But the moment I made the switch, I realized that a lot of the skills and foundation that I learned, it transferred over to the digital stuff.
Right.
And and then I really started diving into digital painting, and that was kind of a new chapter, right?
Right.
And so yeah, and that was kind of like the first big shock for me as a artist, as a student, and getting introduced to a new tool,
Right.
and how that really disrupted my own workflow. And it did make me feel a little uncomfortable at first because a part of me couldn't help stop thinking that, oh man, I'm starting all over again. This sucks, right? You just kind of felt like there was a hard reset.
Right.
And and I think it feels that way when you're diving into anything new, right? You
Of
suddenly
course.
start to feel like, oh, maybe the fundamentals, like I got to relearn the fundamentals. I got to relearn all this
Right.
stuff, baby steps. It's very daunting, but it's actually not. It's baby steps in terms of learning the program, but
Mm.
your ability to think, problem solve, your basic understanding of fundamentals will always be there. It does not matter what it is, if whether you're sculpting in clay or using Photoshop or using 3D, and obviously now we have the surge of AI.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Right.
but the thing is, the fundamentals will always be there, and that's what's going to be true, um, and that's what's going to stand still no matter what, despite all this new tech that's going to come our way. And so that was kind of like my first, yeah, like introduction into like adapting and adopting into a new tool.
Wow. Wow. So, if I could take you back a little bit more, this is before you even considered joining a place like Art Center. How was your connection towards art and design? Like, what led you to think that, okay, having a creative career is something that I want to, subscribe to?
And I as a Asian American, I
Mhm.
I really did poorly in academics.
Right.
And when I say poorly, it's really bad. I would get C's and D's. Like I was failing probably 30 to 40% of my classes.
I see.
Um, and so it did hurt my confidence because
Mhm.
I grew up in an area where there's just a lot of emphasis on education and mainly in regular academics, where I see my friends who are excelling, they're getting great grades, and they're doing really well in their tests, and they got into very good colleges. And so it always kind of hurt my confidence as a person.
Mhm.
And the escapism was actually art. And
Wow.
so
Okay.
it wasn't necessarily like I discovered art at an early age and said, I'm gonna do this forever, and everything else doesn't matter. I think I always enjoyed art, but I realized it was always a form of escapism where I felt the most comfortable doing art. And I felt that that was my calling, and because I couldn't do anything else. I just
Right.
was really horrible at academics. I was horrible in math. I was horrible in writing. I knew that I was never going to be a doctor or a lawyer or work at a bank. Like I just didn't have that kind of um, you know ability to think and analyze that way. And
Right.
so um, yeah, it's just like art was the thing that I felt least amount of pressure, least amount of
Mhm.
judgment. Um, but it's weird. I get into it, and you still get that that kind of judgment from family and people who don't understand art. And so
Right.
they're like, what, you can't make a living doing this. And so that started really making me feel more depressed. I'm like, oh no, this is so bad. And so but I was yeah, I was lucky enough to go into community college and then to discover a place like Art Center.
Mhm.
And so I was really thankful that I was able to connect with some folks that led me
Right.
down that path.
Right. At Art Center, because I think a lot of the current artists that the community really looks up to, a lot of them have the stamp of Art Center in their
Yeah,
career, path.
yeah,
So I'm sure you spend a lot of time, like, not speaking of teachers, because Scott Robertson, he's a master at that point
yeah,
as well. But you also probably shared your curriculum with other students who are at the same level as you, working with you even right now. So how were your conversations with fellow students around that time? What were you guys discussing at that point? Because this is still much earlier than how we perceive the industry right now. That time, things were a little bit more open ended, because entertainment design became a thing later. At that point, it was still almost film design and industrial design in some sort of a way. So how was the
yeah,
conversation between you and, I remember Junan was one of your batchmates or something. I don't remember. Uh,
yeah,
so how were
yeah.
the
I
conversations going on between you guys at that point?
Yeah, when we were classmates at the time, everything still felt like we were in a bubble.
Hmm.
Um, that that we were kind of a part of this small, tiny club that no one knew, no one
Right.
understood what entertainment design was, and so um, it was really exciting. It was also hard to get other people to understand what we did
Right.
because we would say, "Oh, I'm actually, I want to be an artist that works on movies," and I would
Mhm.
try to explain that to my parents, and they'll say, "Well, I don't see any artwork on there. It's using real
Oh wow.
camera or
Right.
or animations. Are you drawing each animation? Like those look like 3D." And so it was hard to like articulate that to people who weren't in the industry. But as a student, you felt like you had this community. It was like a small little bubble of
Right.
people that knew what this was about.
Right.
And we all didn't really have any expectation of what the industry could offer, but we
Mhm.
all knew we loved to create characters, vehicles, environments, worlds,
Right.
and tell stories using our artwork. And going to a school like Art Center, I felt that that school was like going to some crazy boot camp.
Mhm.
You're so tired. They give you so much homework. And I think that art center look that people refer to, I know
Mhm.
exactly where that comes from. It's it comes from like insane amounts of homework that's piled on you,
Right.
and you have to come up with a formula.
Right.
And the formula is, you know, try to get through your entire week, finish all the assignments, but use the formula in order to execute everything efficiently and on time.
Interesting.
Now, it does affect quality of the artwork, but more importantly, it affects the quality of the idea because
Wow.
it's really about a numbers game and it's really about a quantity kind of experience. And I understood why they did that. It was really to it was kind of their philosophy in terms of training people where they want you to have a higher tolerance for work,
Mhm.
understand how to fail quickly,
Mhm.
right? Understand that the artwork that you produce should not be treated as a precious one-off idea.
Right.
Ideas are very cheap, that they should be quick communication tools. And yeah, and that you should learn how to disconnect yourself, not to get too attached, too emotional with the artwork, because it's really a means to an end, that
Right.
it's really going to be for a bigger collaborative effort. And so I remember going through this experience with my classmates, June On, Mark Castanion,
Right.
um, gosh, I'm gonna like Albert Ing, Luke Belderez, all these people that I grew up with. Ben Morrow, he was a really good friend of mine,
Wow.
or he's a good friend of mine, but he was we were like we were roommates. We
Oh
stayed at the
wow.
same,
Right.
and so it was such a cool experience. Like Josh Cal, all these folks, like really talented people. It felt like we were all like starting level one. No one
Right.
knew anything, no one knew about anything, expectations of the industry. All we knew was, oh my God, how are we going to get all this homework done? you
Right,
know?
right.
We all had ideas like, I think this is the way, I think this is what's gonna be the best. I think
Uh-huh.
this is gonna be the best way to, execute the homework. And we didn't really have ArtStation at the time.
Mm-hmm.
It was it was it was Blogspot, and
Right,
that was still new. And so we would share links like, oh my God,
right,
you should follow this guy. This person is this person's doing the cool stuff, right?
right,
So
right,
the work would change every single week, where it would imitate, a certain artist for one week, and then it would
right,
imitate someone else. And that was really the educational experience we're still trying to figure out.
right,
Sense what works, because no one had the answers.
right. And around this time
Yeah.
also, like, internet started becoming a more valuable part of your education, because I think forums at that point started growing more, the Saigon forums and all, where you could
Yeah.
literally, you understood that the community is not restricted towards just one college anymore. It's a bit more spread
Yeah.
apart. A lot of people from different parts of the world are contributing to this thing. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's very interesting. But I also found this thing interesting that you said about uh, their mindset around the education, because I feel like there's a lot of mileage building that they were
Mhm.
focusing on. But what were the conversations around creativity and creative abstract thinking at that point? Was that something that they would tackle at a later stage, or you would be reminded of being very unique from day one with your
Yeah,
work?
that's the one thing I really appreciated about what Art Center did, is they gave you
Mm-hmm.
so much homework. You had
Mm-hmm.
no time to think about creativity,
Hmm.
and I understood why. Um, is that and I would talk about this with my students currently at
Mm-hmm.
Brainstorm. I would say, you know, if we're writing a book, I think we all have really great stories to tell and really great ideas.
Right.
But right now, I don't want your grammar, your ability to articulate yourself to get in the way of your expression. And
Right.
so a school like Art Center, what they did was they forced you to get really good at writing, or in this case, art. They forced you to get really
Mm-hmm.
good at the communication part of it. And it might
Right.
not be the most creative, but you knew how to compose a really, really, really beautiful drawing, a really
Mm-hmm.
beautiful scene, whatever it may be, a really beautiful character. And then once you understood how to compose that, then you can lace on the creativity on top.
Right.
Um, I never knew why that was that way until I got further along in my education, and also even working. I was like, oh, because when you're working professionally, um, you people will always try to look for flaws,
Right.
right? If they see a flaw in the drawing itself or the painting, they don't care how amazing the idea is. Because it becomes a distraction point. So that to me was kind of always an interesting point, but I understood why a school like Art Center, focused on just going more the boot camp route, like overloading students with just a lot of mileage,
Mm-hmm.
because they wanted you to be really good at drawing to the point where you don't have to worry about the drawing and you can start worrying about the creativity. Because creativity, there's no ceiling. It
Right.
just keeps on going, right? As you live life, as people explore things, they explore different cultures, they maybe different trends, your creativity will be ongoing. But
Right.
when it comes to certain fundamentals, foundation drawing, there are certain steps, there are certain mastery points where, you ask someone like Craig Mullins,
Mm-hmm.
he knows how to paint everything in the world, right?
Right.
Everything. So if I were to ask him, hey, do you know how to make a painting using green and red? He'll say, yo, yeah, of course. And so, I don't think he'll have an issue with that. But if I were to ask him, like, hey, can you make, a really unique design of a building um, using a cactus
Right.
as your main inspiration theme? It's hard to master that, right?
Right.
Because that is on the creativity end, and it's there's an interpretation that's unique to you as a person. But
Right.
the fundamentals, there are guidelines and rules that I feel like everyone has to kind of get a good handle of in the beginning. And that's what a school like Art Center has emphasized for a lot of the students starting out.
Right, right. So also, does a school like Art Center or any other actual physical art design institutions, do they at any point, is their goal also to help you find a unique voice for yourself, or that's something that they would leave up to you to find out even after you finish your education? How do they approach that?
Yeah, I think that's something that's up to the individual. I know that a school like Art Center or other colleges and universities,
Right,
they will always encourage finding your own voice,
right.
but I don't think they will try to help, like, enforce that, right?
Got it.
I think that discovery is made on an individual basis. I know a lot of my classmates, and even including myself, like, we found our voice after leaving school,
Right.
you know. I think while you're in school, it's all about imitation, right? Imitation is really the best way to learn, and it's really a form of, complementing the artists that we look up to. But because we're unsure of what kind of voice that we want to share, or what kind of vision we want to really that we want to, share with the rest of the world, it's still very, I guess, new, and everyone's kind of adjusting and adopting. And
Right.
so yeah, I know that, like, that is something that is a bit more organic. It's definitely something that, I've heard teachers talk about it. They'll say, hey, try to find your own voice, but I haven't I haven't seen anyone successfully teach that, because
Right.
I don't think you necessarily teach that, you
Yeah.
know. And I think if people try to teach it, it feels very unnatural, because um it has to come from within. I feel like it has to be very natural. And it has to be very natural to you as a person, as an individual, as a human being. What resonates with you? What
Right.
Why do you like it? Do you like it because everyone else is saying that it's cool, or do you like it because this is what you genuinely believe in?
Right,
You know?
right, right, right. Yeah, because thinking of someone like, as we spoke about Craig Mullins as well, he's his work resonates with people a lot, but also listening to him, he seems like more of a surgeon than a painter. He thinks in a very engineered approach towards how to break something down and then build it back up. Whereas
Yes.
some other artists are a bit more romantic with their
Yes.
approaches, where they emote, feeling like Alberto Mielgo's work speaks about that as well. Like
Yes.
there's a sense of
I
the mundane of the human lives that we live that resonates very deep with his work. But Greg's work is very okay. Let's break this down in terms of all these factors of value, form, separation,
I
and
love
yeah,
that. I love that. I love that you brought that up, because I talked about this because I know both Craig and Jamie Jones.
right,
I met Craig way later in my career, and I
uh-huh,
mean, he's my hero. and
right.
and to be able to to be able to talk to meet your hero and talk with your hero is like, it's my bucket list. I can
Right.
die now.
It's a very humbling
But
feeling.
yeah, it's
I'm
really
actually
humbling.
having that moment right now with you, by the way.
No way, man. No way. No way,
It's
man.
crazy.
You and I are, we're on the same level. We're here, and
Oh man.
I'm always looking up to those guys. And same with Jamie Jones.
Mhm.
I'm a huge admirer of his work. But what I admire more than the work is the mentality. Like, what did they
Mhm.
think about?
Mhm.
And someone like Jamie, and I asked him, I was like, hey, like, how did you cultivate, like, your skill set in your work? And I know
Right.
it's a very broad, and it's kind of a difficult
Right.
question to, like, answer,
Because there's
but
no one point of reference that he can provide.
yeah, there's no one point. But
Right.
in the way he answered his in that question, he was kind of explaining, giving me different examples. He loves the craft,
Mhm.
and him as a person, he has such attention to detail, but even his writing. We were out getting lunch one day, and he was kind enough to I don't know if he paid for lunch or we were somewhere, but I saw him write his name,
Right.
and I was like, that's the most beautiful handwriting I've ever seen him.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So beautiful. It's he writes in cursive, and there's a classic aspect to it.
Right.
And I thought in my head, I was like, whoa, you're like someone who plays classical music
Right.
really, really, really well. And you appreciate the classical music, the art of classical music and composing in a very classical manner. And that's why his work just has a certain feeling to it. It's just beautiful. It's just like the word is, it's always beautiful.
Right.
Like it's like
Right.
it can be the craziest thing, but it's just beautiful. It can be a scene of explosion, but you're like, that's so beautifully done.
Right. Right.
Someone like Craig Mullins, and this is why I love the point that you made was like, he is truly a scientist. He's
Right.
a engineer. He's like a surgeon. He loves to reverse engineer and rebuild his process. Um, and I remember I was talking to him, and he made a similar analogy about music. He said, I'm more like a jazz musician. And I was like, that makes
That
sense.
makes so much sense, right?
Yeah, because jazz music, there's structure, but it's about breaking the rules.
Right.
There's and I'm not a musician, so hopefully I don't offend anyone by saying this.
But I get
But
what you
I
mean, because jazz has this beauty in the chaos as well.
yes,
Things don't
yeah,
align up, but then suddenly something resonates very strongly
something,
with you about that.
yeah, yeah,
Just like an experimentation process on its own on live
yeah,
stage.
exactly. Yeah, it's like a big improvising kind of,
Right. Right.
like journey. And Craig is that kind of guy.
Right.
His personality is about just improvisation, um and that, it not everything has to be composed. It's about breaking the rules and doing
Hmm.
things that are unusual.
Hmm.
And that's what he strives for, and that is his voice.
Right.
That's what I realized, that's the reason why that's the reason why he produces the work that he produces. And that's
Right.
why when we look at it as an audience, we perceive it a certain way. We're like, man, such a unique style. There's
Right.
such a unique voice because he's being true to himself. And just like
Hmm.
Jamie, I don't think, and I know this, I don't think Jamie wakes up and he goes, I'm gonna do the most beautiful painting. It's just his personality is just a very controlled, very beautiful, kind of like crafted kind of individual. Like everything
Right.
that he does is done with care, and it's done with a really, really well crafted intention, you
Right.
know? And that's why, like, seeing his handwriting, it made that connection. I was like, that's why your work looks amazing.
Right.
My work
Right.
doesn't look like that because my handwriting is so sloppy.
Oh, come on.
So I'm serious, parts of my painting, I'm like, I can see where there's like my kind of style resides. I'm like,
Hmm.
whoa, it's kind of in this realm where it's like it's a little scrappy because that's my personality.
Right.
I'm not always perfectly composed,
Hmm.
um and so, but I love looking at these artists, like Craig Mullins, Jamie Jones, Maciej Kuchara,
Right.
Jama, like all these incredible artists, because in their own awesome way, they found out what resonates with them.
Right.
They captured their personality in their artwork.
Hmm.
That is how you define your style.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
really, really well put. And I mean, speaking a bit more about, like, if I put Jamie and Craig on two sides of the spectrum, I see Jamie's work is something which is the interesting part about that work, but also the scary part about the work is that you it's very difficult to reverse engineer his work because you know that he's painting images out. But then again, once that part's done in your head, okay, tools used, Photoshop, got it. Now how is he doing it? That's the crazy ability that his work has. And then jumping to Craig's work, where it's more mechanical, but also like very well understood. Like he'll look at a painting and he'll figure out what the other side of that form looks like, and he will construct that in front of you. So that gives
Yeah.
you the whole idea of just artistic aesthetic, romanticized aesthetic, to very like beautifully structured out. That brings me to the center point where your work lies, where I'm seeing that crazy amount of beauty and just finesse in work attached to that beautiful technical ability, which is why I think your videos have taught me so much more than I've seen
Wow.
in other courses, because there's this beautiful approach that you have towards even how to study and approach studying something, not just to create amazing images, but like how to understand what you need to understand about an image, which makes
Wow.
you such an amazing teacher. So I'm very keen to know about your journey as a teacher, because you began this amazing initiative called Brainstorm, which even I've been a student of, actually. So I just want to know how that journey has been for you from the humble days of Brainstorm when you were working this out with James Beck. How was that for you?
Thank you. Well, first off, um, man, thank you. You make me sound a lot cooler than I actually
Because
am.
you are. No one's going to doubt that.
I get very uncomfortable when people compare me with Jamie Jones and Craig Mullins. I'm like, no, you can't. Like to me, they are the greatest of all time. Genuinely. Those guys, along with, gosh, like there's other guys I look up to in film, like Ben Proctor,
Mhm.
Dylan Cole, Steve Messing,
Right.
Fausto, David Levy. There's all these guys, and Jonathan Bach. Um, there's these guys that I in my head, they will always live above the clouds. Um, I guess I could start off with what kind of led me down the path that I am in right now, and
Mhm.
hopefully I can connect it with teaching. Um, so I spoke about imitation,
Mhm.
and I realized that that was for me as a student. That's how I learned as well. It just and it's very common, right? You know, we
Right.
all do studies, master copies. Um, but I wanted to try to figure out and dissect the process. I think that was something that I really enjoyed more than the result, was
Mhm.
really about the mindset. And I don't know, do you watch anime?
Not as much, but I am a fan of the craft for sure.
Okay. Well,
Right.
there's this, you know, like I mean this is dated, but like there's a anime called Naruto.
Oh, of course, yeah.
And then
Definitely.
there's a teacher, Kakashi Sensei,
Right.
right? Um I I'm like, if I'm a character, I'm like, I'm that guy.
Oh, wow. Okay. Okay.
I'm a copy ninja. I'm not Naruto, I'm not Sasuke, I'm not the cool dudes, you
Right.
know, but Sasuke is really cool, or
Mm.
Kakashi is really cool. Like he's what I resonate with him, I was like, whoa, if I'm anybody, if I'm a character, I feel like I resonate more with this particular character because
Right.
I'm a copy ninja where I can copy it, interpret it in my way, and
Mhm.
try to um recreate it and try to understand the mechanics or understand the aesthetic behind it.
Right.
And I think the reason why I became more in that route was that I was in the search of like figuring out what my voice was.
Mhm.
And during this process, I was like, my voice is trying to understand, because it goes
Right.
back to the root of who I am, which was I had such a hard time understanding um, school subject matter, that it made me very insecure. I became I wasn't a confident person. So,
Mhm.
my personality always kind of stayed very neutral. I wasn't, one way or the other. Even artistically, I didn't veer one way or the other because I didn't know what I liked. And I didn't, and I was just kind of like an open canvas. I was like, oh, maybe this looks cool, maybe that looks cool. Let's just try it out.
Right.
But because of my background, where I couldn't break things down structurally, I had to figure out my own way to understand how to create an image like Craig Mullins. Not that I can, but I would try to. Yeah, that would be my
Right.
form of education, and kind of like meditating and trying to figure out, okay, well, how does how would Craig Mullins, paint, how would he paint a tree?
Right.
What tools and brushes does he use? And why does it look the way it looks? And why does it have this Craig Mullins feel? And it's everything that we talked about. It's jazz.
Right.
And then I'll do the same thing. I was like, okay, if I paint a tree and it looks like Jamie Jones, what makes it look like a Jamie Jones feeling? And I'm like,
Mhm.
oh well, everything is beautiful. Everything is done with a certain level of intent, but it's very rhythmic
Right.
and it's like classical music. And for me, I love the process of trying to analyze and break it down. And that's what really got me into teaching, you know,
Okay.
because I wanted to learn things for myself, but I also wanted to share. Like I almost like as if I discovered something. I'm like, hey guys, I found the answer to this thing. Look over here. Like this is how you can paint like this person, even though that's not how they paint. But I thought I found the answer, but
Right.
really it was I was on the journey to kind of find my own voice, which
Mhm.
was, oh, I'm the person who tries to, you know, break things down and imitate other artists. That's what I really enjoy. And I think through that process, I probably created and found my own voice and my own style, because it's kind of a cobble and a mixture of different different artists that I really looked up to.
Right.
And so it made me understand that in art, even though everyone has their own process, they have their own secret.
Mhm.
What I really enjoyed is the secret to making art is that there is no secret. It's just about being
Right.
constantly curious, you know? I used to think it was always a secret. I'm like, oh man, how did they do this thing? And some artists are more private and they like to not really openly share. But because of my background and not being educationally savvy, I was like, well, if I can figure it out, anyone can,
Hmm.
And as a matter of fact, I want to share with people like, hey, this is how I did it. Like I figured it out, and I'm not the smartest person in the world,
Right.
but what do you think? And it was just really came from that simple intention of like, hey, I just want to share the things that I discovered and see if people agree with me. And I think that's what led me down the whole teaching route.
Right.
It really started with that simple discovery of
Mhm.
trying to analyze and break down artwork, and then passing it on, and just starting kind of like a creative slash educational discussion, with
Right.
other students who are colleagues and artists of this community. It's just like, hey, like this is how I learned it, but what do you guys think? Like, does it resonate? Does it make
Hmm.
sense? Is it improving your understanding of it? And it becomes a very fun experience, because the students will take that information, they'll interpret it, they'll kick out, they'll make something way cooler. And then along the way, they'll say, hey, actually, I took the process that you showed us
Right.
and I evolved it. I did it like this. And I'm like, that's even cooler. That's better than what I did. Like,
Right.
how did you come up with that? And it creates this conversation, like an open dialogue. And I fell in love with that.
Hmm.
Um, and so I've been teaching since, gosh, it was been since 2009. That's when I officially started teaching at my friend's school at Red Engine.
Right.
I was there when it first opened in Los Angeles, and I wasn't teaching a painting class or anything like that. I was still trying to figure out how to mix colors and stuff. But
Right.
I was teaching I was teaching a drawing class. It was like a perspective environment drawing class.
Right.
Um, and I also taught vehicle and mech design, because
Wow.
I love drawing mechs. That was like my thing.
Right.
And and I fell in love. I was like, this is really cool. This goes beyond this is not about me, you know, trying to be in a position of like, hey, I'm the teacher, I know it all. But it was
Right.
more of, hey, I have some cool, interesting theories
Mhm.
that I like to share. Um, and if it works out for you, great. And I love to just kind of see how it benefits people who are learning this for the first time.
Right.
And that's where I fell in love. I fell in love with the idea of just wanting to teach, to kind of create like light a spark in people's creative path, and to see how they take it and how they evolve, right?
Right.
And I don't necessarily want them to be a replica, a carbon copy of me, because
Mhm.
that's not what life is about. It's about inspiring people to find their own voice, you know?
Of course.
Um, and 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 that's the journey that I'm on. And yeah, so that's
Wow.
kind of
Wow.
what sparked me to become a teacher.
Right. 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 Because so now at this point, as you started understanding that you want to impart this knowledge, you partake on this journey with James Peck and
Yes.
start ironing out this amazing school called Brainstorm, right?
Yes. Thank
So
you. Thank you.
how was that initial? Because the reason why Brainstorm makes me so interested is because this started building up at a time where we already had schools like Art Center, and obviously
Yeah.
they're a very expensive affair in general.
Yeah.
Even like a week ago, I had the opportunity to sit with Zach Berger and talk to him about this as well, because even he is an Art Center student. So we also got into the discussion as to how expensive these schools get. And in that situation, schools like Brainstorm, they are amazing because they are at this point, because right now a school like Brainstorm or even online courses like Learn Square, even Satish's school,
Yeah.
they're basically providing,
It's amazing.
yeah, they're basically building out something that allows almost affordable to free access to knowledge, which
Yeah.
was very much hidden away at one point.
Yeah.
And the best part is that folks like you who are working within the industry are the teachers, rather than having someone who have worked in the industry for a long time but they do not work in the industry anymore. So any kind of information you provide is going to be slightly outdated to some
Yeah.
level. Maybe Art Center
Yeah.
is not that. Maybe Art Center is very evolved when it comes to that. But what, in terms of the ethos or the goal of Brainstorm, how was that initial beginning for Brainstorm for you guys?
Yeah. So yes, a school like Art Center is it's very expensive. And I think that's an
Right.
understatement. It will and any private college
Mhm.
is expensive, right? And I have my own opinions about private institutions like Art Center and stuff like that. I owe a huge debt to Art Center,
Mhm.
because I got to meet my mentors
Right.
and a lot of friends and stuff it was an incredible experience. But I felt I felt lucky because I was within proximity of the school.
Mhm.
I felt lucky because I had the right people around me to help me build a portfolio to get a scholarship.
Right.
But it was very it was really hard to see, some of my classmates who didn't have that opportunity, and just seeing the cost of the school really weigh them down. Like it's almost this heavy thing on your shoulders where reality kicks in and you get out of school and you have this crazy amount of debt.
Right.
And
And I also feel while you're in school, because I think scholarships are also a thing that drives them to work as students in a certain way. But I think the money pressure always makes them pick classes which they would ideally not go for, just so
yeah,
that they can, score enough credits to be on a scholarship list, essentially.
yeah, yeah,
Technically driving
exactly.
them slightly away from the journey that they want to take.
Yeah, it does affect a lot. It has a emotional and psychological impact, just and again, I think all these schools have a lot to offer.
Mhm.
But what started what started Brainstorm, and it was with my and James Pake he's my mentor.
Right.
He really opened my eyes in the world of doing freelance and concept art as a business. Like, okay, how do I work for these companies, and how do I negotiate and understand to set terms and rates and all that stuff. It was such a
Mhm.
new language to me, and I learned all of that from James. And James Pig was that person who unlocked that side. When we started Brainstorm, and James has years of teaching, probably 15, 20 years of teaching now, I want to say. And he was a longtime instructor at Concept Design Academy, and we both taught there. And that school is ran by Kevin Chen, who's an incredible instructor. That school, honestly, we owe a lot to Concept Design Academy because they helped inspire starting Brainstorm. But we just wanted to try something for ourselves and just see like, hey, could we do this? Is this something that we could just do on our own and just kind of venture out? And it was never with the intention of, let's make this massive school. That was not it. It was just more like, hey, if we could teach a class and we could teach anything, and there's no curriculum, there's no pre-made class structure, and we just want to figure out what is our version of teaching this particular subject matter. How would we do it? And could we do it? Right. And so that's when, back in 2014, we started Brainstorm. So it's been almost 9 years since we started school. And it was just one class and 10 students. And we used James's studio. It was like on the bottom floor. There was like this open area, and it was exciting. We went to like IKEA, we got furniture, got the chairs, and we got the projector, and then we used one of James's old computers that he wasn't using, and I was like, oh my God, we're finally doing our own little thing. And it was exciting because it was never about the monetary aspect. It was never about like, oh man, we're gonna do our own business, but it was more like, we get to teach anything that we want, the way we want, and how we want, and any class that we want to come up with, we can do it because this is a blank canvas. I felt like when you teach at other schools, there's already kind of a curriculum. There's already a tone that you need to at least be aligned with, or kind of fit into, which works. It works for that school. But for us, we wanted to be more experimental and just kind of figure out, well, what do we want to do, right? And we wanted to experiment with, updating the education with things that we're learning on the job, and then implement that into the classroom to provide, the most current, information, but also trying things out that don't quite work the way we were taught. I was taught perspective, or I was taught certain things that were a little bit old school, which worked back then, but because of new tools, new things, like things have rapidly changed, and what studios look for have rapidly changed as well. And so that made us want to update, and change the classroom experience, the content experience. And so that was the real main start of Brainstorm. And when I was experiencing Art Center as a student, and I actually got to teach one of the classes there called Originality for Design. I felt like things were so set, and they were set in their ways, and they're a big college. And I know it's very bureaucratic. It must be very hard to make decisions or make changes and stuff on the fly. But I just felt like that the people that would get affected are the students, because if you don't if you can't pivot or make a swift change, the students are the ones that are going to get most affected out of this, because they're the ones going there, they're paying for the tuition, they're getting the education. But if they can't make a swift change because of structural reasons or curriculum reasons or instructor reasons, whatever it may be, the students they're not getting the most up-to-date kind of knowledge and education. And so that's what really like added a lot of reasoning for why we wanted to do our own thing. It was just, we wanted to just share like, hey, we found certain answers that work really well. And now we're at a place where there's so much awesome schools. There's so many awesome instructors out there.
Right.
If I started my education now, I feel like first off, it's very daunting because there's so many schools out there,
Right.
but it's awesome because I think as a artist, you should not be beholden, or as a student, you should not be beholden to go to one school. I don't
Right.
believe in that. I think you should go to the schools that have your favorite artists, your favorite
Hmm.
teachers, you know? The entire internet is it's your canvas of classes. You get to kind of pick and
Right.
choose. You know, like for me, I want to learn from Satish, from Jama. I want to learn from, from James.
Hmm.
I want to learn from June on the painterly stuff. And
Right.
like you didn't have that ability if you were going to a traditional college because
Right.
you
Right.
have to utilize instructors there. But the college is really the internet now. You can kind of use everything. So there's pros and cons obviously to that
Hmm.
because there's so much information, it's hard to know like, well, how do you navigate the space?
Right.
But the flip side, it's beautiful because the accessibility is right at the click of a button, right?
Right.
And and it's only going to get better.
Right. 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 It's interesting about the accessibility factor as well, because I mean, I hold some unconventional thoughts when it comes to education slightly, because I've always subscribed to the idea that education till a certain point should be incredibly affordable to almost free,
Mm,
because that allows a lot of people, and this is probably coming from a country where there is a wide gap in income ranges. a lot
right.
of a lot of people living in remote areas across the country do not have access to even jobs that would be able to provide them the education that they want. So for
Hmm.
them, people have to come forward and provide free education, and internet is one place where that becomes a lot easier.
Yeah.
So in terms of even now this comes to the business side of running a school in today's day. How does Brainstorm think about costing, charging certain fees for certain kinds of classes? Because I know the mentorships cost a certain amount, but then you
Yeah.
have flash courses at this point. So like you don't have to go into details about like how you guys structure that out, but I wanted to know what's your philosophy around assigning value to certain classes that certain instructors are teaching over there.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I keep it very simple where if the instructors aren't teaching, they're working, right?
Right, right.
Thing is like, and I'm a huge, I believe that education should be free
Mm-hmm.
or should be very affordable and cheap. The only problem is when when if that becomes the case, and teaching eats up a certain amount of time,
Mm-hmm.
it's time away from their studio job, it's time away from freelance and whatnot.
Makes
So
sense.
there's a huge there's a huge deficit there. And
Right.
so like for example, when I'm teaching, I'm not working. And when I'm
Right.
not working, I'm not making money. And so that's kind of where there has to be a slight balance.
Mm-hmm.
And I think most folks understand that, but I think maybe some of the students might be like, well, this doesn't make sense. Well, the thing is, in order to get the top tier instructors
Mm-hmm.
to not be working on their day job, we need to find a way to kind of supplement that gap, and that
Right.
has to be in a form of charging a certain price for the classes.
Right. Right.
And we wanted to make it fair enough, make it accessible enough where it's like, okay, this is price at this level for these students for this time frame, but also the the compensation for the instructors,
Right.
it can at least compensate where they feel okay or comfortable to take time
Right.
off their jobs, you know?
Right.
And we've had a lot of instructors who, because of online teaching
Mm-hmm.
and being that that it can be a source of income, they were able to actually step away from their day jobs and actually use that as a full-time means, a
Right.
full-time.
Wow.
And so that's kind of where I understood like, okay, this is how prices are measured.
Mm-hmm.
Same with mentorships. I do mentorships. I know mentorships are incredibly expensive, but they're also very, very time consuming. Very time consuming. I probably spend on average about 15, maybe 20 hours a week you
Oh,
know?
wow. Okay.
So it's a lot. So
Right.
it's roughly about, if I have, let's say, 10 students and I do demonstrations for them, it ranges anywhere from like an hour to 2 hours per demo per student. But
Right.
it's a lot of the studio off hours where I'm always, doing notes, feedback, trying to communicate and trying to connect with students where that is time away from the job. And those kinds of things, they do factor in. And I've thought about this too when someone asked me like, why do you teach? Like is like is it worth your time? Is it this? And I told them, I was like, well, if I had unlimited amounts of money, let's just
Mhm.
say money was never a thing, I would teach for the rest of my life.
Wow.
If I can make sure that I can pay for the rent for my house, you know, put food on the table, I would just teach because
Right.
that's the best enjoyment that I could have. But that's very hard to do,
Of
right?
course.
Because of course, it won't be able to supplement, if you're to teach for free, it's hard to supplement, paying for rent and all that stuff. And so
Right.
that's kind of where it gets tricky. Um, and there's a lot of other folks who will do it in a way that, you know, they will justify and they'll set it up in a way where it is very beneficial for them. And there's folks that will do it and set it up where it's very beneficial for the students. And I think that's kind of where you have like the cost breakdowns of,
Right.
a class, flash class, where it's like you don't want people to spend a certain amount of money and time, so you
Mhm.
create like a smaller appetizer so people can get into it. They can see if it's interesting to them, and if it
Right.
is interesting, then they can maybe be more invested in the future, right?
Right.
And
Right.
so that's that's my understanding. That's kind of the basis and like kind of the logic that we use to set up our school. And yeah, and it's we're always going to be at a point where we're constantly evolving and trying to figure out like, okay, what's the best balance,
Right.
right? And so as someone who's an educator but also someone who is a part owner of a school, there's like two mindsets where I'm like,
Mhm.
oh, there's the educational side where I'm like, oh, this is what's going to be really helpful. And then there's the other aspect where we're like, okay, shoot, this teacher's not available because it's taking time away from their job. And in
Right.
order for this to work, we'd have to make sure that, you know, we can somehow fill in that gap or supplement their
Mhm.
time that they lose. And so it's a very tricky balance on that side. And that's something where I feel like I wished I learned more about, the balance of business, because
Right.
it's kind of like I understand the creativity aspect, but the
Mhm.
business side is a very challenging thing for me as an artist because
Right.
you know, we didn't learn that in school. That
Right.
wasn't something emphasized at art center or anywhere
Right.
else.
Right.
So,
Right.
um,
Yeah,
but
business
it's
is something
also
not very openly discussed within the artistic community because I think like money is essentially like I believe most people would begin a business to understand how money can help them in many ways. They probably have an idea or a product that would allow them to. It's
yeah,
basically exchanging value for value.
yeah,
But with artists, it becomes a little difficult because there is this purest part of our brains which starts thinking, okay, I get to paint and draw for a living, and that should be all of it. And which is really like, while it at one point would have made sense, it doesn't make sense anymore because things change, people like worlds change, your mindsets change, and you start realizing that finding your potential financial freedom would allow you to do what you do best because you won't have the
yeah.
pressure of finances essentially at the end of the day. But that's a complicated conversation with artists. So business is something that we don't understand inherently very
Yeah,
strongly.
it's like a certain part of the brain where, you got the creative side of the brain,
Right.
and we're as artists, I feel like we're 100% on that side.
Right. Right.
And and then the business side of the brain is like it's on the logic side. It's like it's
Right.
on this side of the brain. So where it doesn't really utilize emotion, it just
Mhm.
utilizes like data, right? So it's probably more engineers and stuff would be
Right.
more
Right.
keen to understand that. Um, yeah, I wish that the education on business for artists was better integrated in
Right.
all colleges. You know, I think it's a very important component because at the end of the day, you know, if we wanted to draw without if we wanted to draw for ourselves and
Mhm.
we wanted to do it freely,
Right.
it's almost better to just have a regular job and to do art on the side.
Right. Right.
That's the truth. I know this might not everyone will agree with this, but that is the true meaning of doing art for yourself,
Of course.
right? But when we do art for companies,
Mhm.
it is a service. It is that
Yeah.
you are a commercial artist at that point, and
Right.
you have to think more deeply. What is the goal? And the goal is to help create and to be a collaborative contributor for a certain experience that you're helping to build out or design out,
Right.
which is either in a form of a video game or a movie, a TV show, a toy product, right? Anything. And
Mhm.
and that's basically that is the goal, right? And
Right.
so and I don't think artists, when they're drawing and painting, I don't think they're thinking about like my dream is to see this movie up on the screen. They're thinking,
Right.
well, my dream is that I get to be a creative person and to
Right.
help voice my own creativity, to my team or to this larger audience. And then the result ends up being something really great where you can see your influences in there. Um, but that is, we're essentially a part of a cog. We're part of a larger, bigger machine,
Right.
and that machine requires multiple disciplines, and it requires a lot of effort, and it
Right.
requires and because it requires a lot of effort, that's kind of where we need to understand that everyone needs to be compensated for their effort, in
Mhm.
that.
Mhm.
um but I do feel that artists in general, because we draw, we paint with such an emotional intent. A
Right.
lot of it stems from the things that we're thinking about, we're daydreaming, or maybe we had an idea while you're driving or going on a walk. It comes from like a very pure place,
Right.
that you want to share. Um, and if you want to share that, freely and openly, I think doing art for yourself is really the best form of that.
Right.
But if when the moment you assign value, where you're trying to say, well, I want to get paid for my creative ideas,
Mhm.
then I think that's kind of where understanding the business of these industries is very important.
Right.
Understanding our role is very important, right?
Right.
Understanding our job description at, let's say, a game studio is
Mhm.
incredibly important, so that you understand your own value as an artist, what you bring to the table,
Right.
and how you should be compensated. I think a lot of those conversations don't happen that frequently. I feel like they
Mhm.
should more often.
Right.
It's weird. It tends to happen after the fact, like after you get a
Right.
job or something, and
I think
artists.
regret is a small part of it, because once you do join a company and you realize that you did not really fend for yourself financially, and you bought into a contract before really fighting for yourself, and then you know that now it's going to be a commitment for a while, and you won't be able to change
Yeah,
that rate for yourself. So I
yeah,
think I think regret is
yeah,
a small part of it.
yeah. And I think it's interesting because I remember when I was working on these jobs, obviously you get paid for your time.
Right.
And there's things where I have all these like emotions going in, and I'm like, wow, this job is not great, but I'm getting paid well. right?
Right.
And it's a very short-lived feeling. I feel really great for a couple days, and I'm like, gosh, I hate this. I
Mm,
really, really feel like I'm wasting my time.
mm,
And that's kind of where I feel like as artists, I think everyone will go through that. Everyone
mhm.
will kind of go through things where it's like, wow, that was financially great, but I like you just were never proud of the artwork that you created. You're like, ugh, that was
Right.
just like I don't even want to think about that. Let's put this in a folder and then let's
Right.
store it on an external drive. Let's put it on our shelf somewhere, right?
Right.
So and I mean that in like the artwork was just like poorly art directed,
Right.
colors were bad, the ideas were bad, and you're just like, oh, this is like just a really bad experience. And so, but I feel like that's kind of where it's like, okay, I know from an emotional standpoint and a
Mhm.
psychological standpoint, like I made that decision because it was monetarily beneficial. I was like, wow,
Right.
I did it because I was like, oh, because there's a financial opportunity here.
Mhm.
And then there's opportunities where you're like, that's a cool project.
Right.
That's an awesome project. Like for me, that was Avatar.
Right.
Awesome project. It ended up being even a better project because of the people that were there. I fell in love with my team.
Mhm.
They became a family. And that will stick with me forever, you know?
Right.
Um, and it was a very hard job.
Mhm.
There's times when
I can understand.
it's like we're so stressed out. I'm like, I am dying here, man. This is like not
Wow.
this is like I did not know what I signed up for, but at the end of the day, you're left with an incredible memory and
Right.
you cherish that memory because you're proud of it. You're proud of yourself for going through that experience. And I feel that, you know, these kinds of things need to be shared. I think like,
Mhm.
I think artists, whether you're at a school or whether you're within communities or amongst friends, I think these kind of discussions need to be more apparent and need to be
Mhm.
more broad, wider spread, because I feel that this will bring awareness and help to set expectations, because the expectation of an artist who's starting out, who hasn't had job experiences, they're going to have their own standards. They're going to have their own, expectations of what it should be, how it's going to work, and things like that. And that can be great, but also it can be a recipe for disappointment,
Of
you
course.
know,
Right.
that students might go, "Ah, this is not what I thought. Like, why didn't
Mhm.
anyone prepare me for this?" Or like, I thought I thought every studio was going to be amazing,
Right.
you know? Or, you'll get cases where you'll go to a studio and like it's an awesome job, but then you're like, I I don't like it anymore because I feel like I'm not being properly compensated,
Right.
right? I'm not getting paid enough. So I feel like those conversations need to start earlier so
Mhm.
that artists of all ranges, of all backgrounds, can make a better informed decision about what makes sense for you and what fits your lifestyle.
But do you think that's a conversation that younger artists or folks who are entering the industry right now can they even afford to have that conversation? Because a lot of these decision making are controlled by non-artists within the
It
companies that
Yeah,
they're going to trying to be a part of.
it is and it isn't. I feel that well, first off, like when I talk with my students, there's
Mhm.
already this preconception of what the studio life would be like,
Right.
right? It's like when you're working and you're scrolling through Instagram or ArtStation and you're looking at other artists that you look up to, you're like, man, they're living the life. Like, that is awesome. You're like, I want to be that.
Right.
And whatever they're doing, they just look like they're living their dream. But you might not know the full story. You might not know, well, what are they going through? What's the day to
Right.
day? But
Right.
what is the studio situation, right? Is it a good job
Mhm.
creatively, or is it a good job community wise, or
Mhm.
is it a good job financially,
Right.
right? And those things are never 100%.
Right.
I had this discussion with one of my really close friends. He was asking like, "Hey, out of all your experiences when you worked at these various movies,
Mhm.
um, you know, which one had the highest level of stress?" Right?
Right.
And for me, the highest level of stress was definitely Avatar.
I
It was
see.
like was like if we were to range from like a 10 out of 10, it's a 10.
Right. It's
Highest
funny.
level
It's funny you said that because I thought because I'm pretty familiar with your work and I saw that you worked on Transformers as well. And I've heard that Michael Bay is not an easy person to work with
he's
because
I
he's like such a
yeah.
ambitious
Yeah.
filmmaker as well. So I thought that
Yeah,
would cause the most amount of stress for you.
I've never had that many interactions with him.
Right,
I
right.
may work with the production designers, but
I see. Okay.
I can see how his personality can be pretty stress inducing,
Right,
and make people like give a lot of anxiety.
right,
But yeah, I remember Avatar was high level stress. The pay was very was fairly competitive
right,
with all movies. Um, but I felt like in terms of creativity, it was also 10 out of 10.
right.
So there was something that was always slightly lacking where maybe and the stress was too high. I was like, oh my gosh, like every day I was like, oh my gosh, like this is gonna be crazy.
So what was the
And
stress coming, like where was the stress originating from? Was it from the requirement to be at at your A game constantly or the amount of work that you had to deliver?
it was both.
Okay.
So there was a standard because my production designers, first off, they're not only are they great leaders, but they are crazy artists
Of
themselves. And
course.
that's like it sucks. It sucks in a way where you're like, oh man, they know if you're taking shortcuts and they know
Right.
how long things take. But the thing
Right.
is, like, they're better at doing this stuff than I am, right?
Right. Right.
Like painting, drawing, designing, they're
Mhm.
better at it than I am. And so for me, it was like the ultimate education, but it was like so stressful because every day the standard was so high.
Mhm.
They expected, at least this is the feeling I got.
Mhm.
So I don't want to speak on anyone's other behalf, but I felt like every single day we needed to do at least 1 to 3 paintings a day.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah, and it had to be of a certain quality because, and it was an unspoken rule where,
Okay.
you know, the like the production designers, not only were they managing and leading the team, but they were also doing the work themselves too. So they would go in their
Right.
office after meetings and they would do a painting and you would see it. You're like, wait, you did that in 4 hours? And they're like, yeah. Oh, I gotta go to my next meeting. And you're like, okay. So you're
That's
going back to your office
crazy.
or your desk and
Wow.
you're like, if I don't turn something in,
Right.
then it's gonna look like I'm slacking. And that's kind of where the stress level was, right?
Right.
But the creativity levels was up here too, because you got
Right.
so
Right.
inspired. So you're like, crap, I gotta keep up with them, and it made for a great learning experience. But again, like I said, the stress level was very high.
Mhm.
Creativity was also high, and so there's a give and take, right?
Right.
So that was the expectation. That was the standard, and I never expected that going into this job.
Mhm.
I thought it was going to be creative, but I didn't think it was going to be that stressful. I knew it was going to be
Right.
stressful, but not that stressful.
Right.
And I felt like I became stronger. I learned a lot out of that experience, but it definitely came at a cost, right?
Of course.
Um, the other thing is I had another job where I worked at a video game company. Um,
Mhm.
Stress level was low,
Right.
creativity was high, and
Right.
pay was very low too.
I see.
But I loved it.
Hmm.
It's the weirdest. I still hold those memories very closely to me as well. And it was a game company that my friend started. I worked at his company. His name is Kang Lee,
Right.
and it was a robot game called Haken.
Right.
And I went in there because I'm a huge fan of my friend Kang as an artist. Like I looked up to him, and
He's
he
incredible.
did this book called Skillful Huntsman. Yeah, he's
Right. Right.
awesome. He's so good. But
That
I
was actually the
remember,
first book that I referred to for something
yeah,
called concept art,
yeah,
essentially.
it was
So it
it
was
was essentially
crazy.
it was essentially
Right.
like his book and Doug Chang, the Star Wars episode 1 and 2, were
Right.
those are my
Right.
That was my life. That was my Bible.
You get baptized
Uh,
into the community with those books
exactly.
in a certain way.
Yeah, so like I when I worked at his company, his studio,
Right.
I was like, this is awesome. This is like, if anyone, you know, is going to work at a company or you know, be a part of like a creative community and make cool stuff, this is it.
Right.
This is truly it, you know. And yeah, I was there for a while, like let's say it was about like 3 years or so.
Mhm.
And then the company basically shifted, and then we all basically, after shipping the game, everyone kind of parted ways, and a lot of people went to Riot. And I
Right.
worked there for not a while. I worked there for maybe 4 months. I was at
Mhm.
Riot, which is like the weirdest, you know, because like I don't do that style, but you know,
Right.
they hired me, which is really cool.
That's
And
very cool.
and again, like it's it the the takeaways of that is the stress level's low, the
Mm.
creativity's high, the community's high, you know, but you know, maybe your financial expectations are
Right.
low too. Maybe it doesn't hit what you want. But I feel that a young artist going into it, that they should have a good understanding of where they want to go. How do they want to
Right.
navigate? Right. I don't think students or anyone that's entering this field needs to make a decision.
Mhm.
But I think those kinds of conversations and expectations should be, should bring a little bit of insight and
Right.
just a little, like, you know, planting the seed, you know,
Right.
and just provide a little heads up and saying like, hey, if you go into this industry, know that it's going to feel and be kind of like this,
Right.
right? If you go into this kind of industry, know that this is what it's going to feel like on a creative level, or this is what it's
Mhm.
going to feel like on a community level or on a stress level.
Right.
Um, yeah, and so where I felt zero creativity was when I was doing like commercial work. I did like
Mhm.
some, it was like a cleaning, like bounty cleaning, where you clean like
Oh, okay.
bleach.
Right.
Yeah, it was a very weird job. And that's when I was freelancing a lot. And so you kind of
Right.
just get random jobs. You get jobs from games, like, you get a lot of jobs from like commercials, like soap products, and you know, they always need like some cool stuff for like their commercial that they're doing. So whether it's
Right.
like concepts or storyboards, and I was like, okay, the pay was really good.
Mhm.
Um, it was a very short job, but the creativity was so, like, I would say it was like a -10.
Oh,
It
wow.
would
Okay.
it like it was uninspiring.
Right.
Like I didn't come out going like, wow, that was awesome. I was like, I came out going, what am I doing with my life?
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, so that's why, like, for me, it was such an eye opener, because it made me understand like what kind of artist do I want to be in this field?
Mm.
Because not everything is for everybody, right? Like
Of course.
I think everyone has to kind of figure out their roadmap and figure out what resonates with them, what makes them happy.
Right.
For some people, it might be the money thing.
Right.
I don't know. For some people, from other people, it's definitely the creativity thing,
Mhm.
you know?
Mhm.
And for other people, it's definitely a community aspect, where it's like you are with a really good group of people, and that's what
Right.
matters, right?
Right.
But never have I experienced where all of those were tens.
Right.
So that's, I guess that's kind of through my ranting. That's kind
No,
of what I'm
I think you really pretty fluently set up a premise on how someone even picks a job for themselves at this
yeah,
point. Because I don't know, things have started changing quite a bit in the industry lately.
yeah.
And now everyone has to start figuring what role do they want to play in for a certain project.
Hmm.
And as
Yeah,
you said, for some people, the financial side might be a bit more important than the creative part of it. But I guess uh, we'll come back to this again, because I want to get into understanding like what is the conversation that you would want to have with people starting out, with people who have been in the industry for a while, but they have taken missteps essentially, and they
mm,
want to fix themselves,
right.
and basically re-understand the process of at least how to figure out the correct estimate for the correct value of their time, their hourly rates. Like, how to even understand that for yourself, because that's such a difficult thing to figure out in your earlier stages. Uh, I'll come back to that. I wanted to talk to you a little bit more about, because uh, I love everything Avatar. Okay, I love the project. That was the film that got me to think, like, when I watched that film back in 2009, the first one, I was like, okay, I got to work for films. This is something that I want to do. And probably I had that experience because I went alone to watch the film in the theaters. No one went with me. I didn't go with any friends. And then around 2014, 15, around this time, we started hearing about the term Lightstorm Crew.
Oh,
This rock star group of artists working together. And another trend which became very popular around that time was the quote unquote lunchtime sketches, which you and your creative
oh
collaborators started
man.
doing every single day. That was,
Oh man.
I wanted to know, like, I don't want to go into the discussion about the design of Avatar. I just want to know about your creative collaboration with these folks, like David Levy, Jonathan Berube. Like how were your day-to-day conversations like? Like, how was that experience for you?
Well, it's very intimidating for
Right,
sure. That's the first thing I'll say. Jonathan Berube, Fausto Di Martini,
right.
Jonathan Bach, Seifel, Hawk,
Mhm.
Anik Naim, Nick Gendro. I'm gonna go down the list, and if I forget anyone, I
Right.
apologize. Vinnie McManus, he's
Then
my little
indeed.
brother. Stephen Messing, of course.
Right,
Dylan Cole, Ben Proctor, James Chung, Daphne Yap, Zachary
right,
Berger, Constantine, um, and Joe Pepe. Of course, he's
right,
the lead designer.
right,
Um, those are the people that were in our I would say the floor of where we were
right.
working at, and it was awesome. It was awesome. It
Hmm.
was just to be in here. You felt like everyone had a superpower, you know?
Right.
I felt like I had this imposter syndrome,
Hmm.
going in because it felt like you got recruited by the Avengers and you
Right.
see like that's Iron Man right there. That's Captain America. And I'm like, what superhero am I? And I'm like some weird character that like throws rocks or something.
Oh.
I'm like, I'm the Rock. I'm like, but can you take down Thanos? I'm like, no, but I will throw a rock at his eye and maybe he'll scratch it or something. I felt like
Right.
that guy. I'm the rock guy. I'll throw rocks.
Wow.
That's how I felt, and I think I'll always feel that way because these guys were, and they still are. They're titans to me.
Mhm.
They're people that you look up to, and I still look up to them,
Mhm.
and when they make decisions, like it's so inspiring, but it's also so intimidating because you're just
Right.
like, holy cow, everything that you've read on the books or saw on their online work, it's that, but it's like in real time and it's
Right.
in real life. You're like, oh my God. But they are the most humble and hardworking people you'll ever meet.
Right.
I think I always had this perception. I'm like, man, they're so good
Mhm.
that maybe they know that they're so good, that
Right.
they are the top of their game, but they're not like that. They're like us. They've just
Mhm.
been in the industry. They just have that much more knowledge,
Right.
but very humble, hardworking. And what's funny is that when we have lunch, meetings, or we're looking at someone's computer and we're looking at they'll bring up ArtStation, they'll bring up, like Eitan Zana's work, and
Right.
you'll hear Dylan going like, "Damn it, so good!" And I'm like, "Wait, you're reacting this way? This is cool, man.
Right.
Like, this is surreal for me because those guys are most likely looking at your work reacting the same way. So there's this
Right.
really interesting this this sense of like admiration goes both ways.
Right. Of
This
course.
is what the art community this is what the art community is about. I think anyone who gets very big-headed and thinks that they're great, I'm like, that's no. That's not the way to
It's a
live.
recipe for disaster for yourself,
Yeah,
essentially.
it's definitely a recipe for disaster.
Right.
And yeah, and so my experience working with them was amazing. That's why the community, like, that's why I said earlier, like, even though it was very stressful, the creativity was high, but I fell in love with the team because I fell in love with the people there,
Right.
and I got to know them so well that I call them like my brothers and
Awesome.
sisters. You know, they're just like, they are amazing human
Right.
beings. Um, they don't withhold anything. They're very honest and genuine about sharing. And you get to see their insight, their perspective
Right.
on how they would approach design, how
Mhm.
they would tackle and problem solve. And because they're a master at what they do, you get to see it at the highest level and quality. You're like,
Right.
damn, so that's how you paint the sky? Okay, thank you. And you go back and you're like, okay, now I know, like I learned from one of the best. I'm like, this is
Right.
crazy. And I will never forget that. It was truly the best educational experience.
Right. Right. When you speak of mastery, right? My understanding is that the ability to deal with complexity in the simplest manner possible is what makes someone create masterful work, right? So, for example, as you were seeing some of these folks even like tackle a certain design problem, like what resonated with you where you thought that, okay, this is something that I've never seen. Like we are, I think at some level, we are all being exposed to the same knowledge online at this point, but working with these amazing people, you included, like you are bringing something different to the table. Like, so, like what is for you, what is the concept of mastery essentially? What is that ability? It will be
Yeah.
obviously different from for different people,
Right.
of course,
Yeah.
but how do you approach the idea of, for example, like the age old question of where do you see yourself creatively 10 years down the line, right?
Yeah.
So essentially, yeah.
Yeah, I think I used to look at very linearly, like very
Hmm.
simple, like as a face value. I thought like, oh, mastery is based on what you see.
Right.
It's based on the image. So when I saw, someone like Dylan Cole or Steve Messing, Ben Proctor, those guys, all those guys,
Mhm.
I'm like, my perception of mastery is like, wow, they created this.
Right.
But that's actually not, like, my definition changed and evolved where and this is just my own personal
Hmm.
take, is that the reason why I feel like they're masters is that any problem that they come across, they know how to handle it with such high level of professionalism, but they
Right.
always know how to execute.
Right.
That's where I was like, whoa, you guys are so good. Like, for example, um let's say you're used to painting a landscape with a tree,
Hmm.
and you've probably, let's say, just say an artist paints a landscape with a mountain and a tree, and they're
Right.
comfortable doing it. And they can do it over and over again, and eventually they get used to it. They're like muscle memory.
Right.
And so
Right.
you can call them a master. You're like, oh well, hey, they can do it really well, and they know
Right.
that subject matter. What makes the person a master or a master of their craft is being able to do that consistently with anything that comes their way.
Hmm.
Any problem that is placed in front of them, they're able to internalize it, break it down, use all their experiences, years of experiences, their process, and execute.
Right.
And to do it in a very calm and collective fashion is what I feel like it was such a humbling experience to see in person,
Oh,
because I was freaking out when I was doing certain things. I'm like, I don't know. Like, one of the hardest things for me on Avatar was painting underwater.
right.
I failed. I failed a lot. And
Hmm.
it hits your confidence. It obviously hits
Right.
your ego, right? And you start to kind of go down this very negative path where you're like, am I why am I here?
Right.
Am Do I deserve to be here? And like, it just kind of go, like, your brain starts to like go down this like negative rabbit hole. And I was just like, oh my God, this is so bad. But when I see them do it, they'll
Mhm.
tackle something and then they won't let that get to them. They'll go, okay, this is new,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm going to use all of my years of experience and their professionalism to analyze and break it down and to still execute it as if they've done it for years.
Right.
That's what was so mind-blowing. Like I couldn't explain that experience, like seeing that, witnessing that. I was like,
Right.
I would ask Dylan, I'm like, hey Dylan, like how do I paint this type of water scene? Like you do it so effortlessly. I mean, have you been doing this for years? And he was like, no, just started this year. And I'm like, what? How?
Uh-huh.
And it's about the mindset. He's like, well, instead of just jumping into it,
Mm-hmm.
let's just take a step back and let's just look at it. And it was like like I had like some of the best teaching moments with those guys.
Right.
And he would sit me down and I pull up a chair right next to him. And he'd go like, you know the blue that's here? I'm like, yeah. Notice how it gets darker, not towards the top and not towards the
Right.
bottom, but towards the middle. And I was like,
Right.
oh, interesting. He was like, that's called attenuation, and it's and there's depth. Depth goes more horizontally,
Right.
you know. And I was like, oh, and obviously, just to give you context, this water depth was like it wasn't like super deep water. It was maybe
Mm-hmm.
20 feet of water. So the ground
Right.
had sand. You see the ground, but as you go look straight in the horizon, it's just dark. And for me as a concept artist, I'm like, well, anything that goes far away is atmosphere, so it's gonna get lighter,
Right. Right.
right?
Right. Right.
Just the classic concept art, like
Right.
anything that's far away is gonna have fog. But this was like, wait, why is it getting darker? Like, I don't understand. It's like this makes no sense to me. And so and it's darker, but then it's getting foggier, but it's getting darker, you know?
Wow.
And and I thought in my head, I'm like, oh man, Dylan, like and Steve Messi, I'm like, you guys must have been doing this for so long. And Dylan would sit me down and he's just like, let's look at it. Let's look at a photograph and let's analyze it. And then he would just, instead of painting, he would just like
Mm-hmm.
look at it and ask questions. And he was openly asking me questions on what I thought. He's like, what do you see here? And I'm like, well, I see caustics and I see particulates and the dolphin that's swimming, you know?
Right.
Okay. He's like, that's good. He was like, do you feel confident enough to kind of now jump into it? And I'm like, I think so. And he was like, see, this is where you're probably jumping into it too early, too soon.
Oh, wow.
And
Okay.
this is where he would say, you have the bases down, but you're still not asking the other question, which is, why is the color of the dolphin not gray, but why is it blue?
Right.
There's a film. And so he's like trying to break it down. He says, break it down as much as you can
Mm-hmm.
and try to do little tests. And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
what do you mean? He was like, so instead of making a whole image, why don't you just use this image here and try to add another dolphin and see if you can make it match the photograph to see if you
Wow.
can really if you really understand the material in front of you. And again, and a lot of these experiences was something I experienced like on a daily. So like
Wow.
hopefully I'm not bastardizing or messing up the story here, but like in my head, that's what I experienced for 4 years working with those guys. It was always this, like the way they approach things was done so effectively. And there was like a professionalism and the professionalism that I say is not coming into work dressed up nicely and have a
Mm-hmm.
suit and tie.
Right.
Because that's what I think. I'm like, oh, you're a professional. But it was not overreacting.
Right.
And it was kind of approaching things in a very collective manner and asking questions one step at a time.
Right.
I think that students, and myself included,
Mm-hmm.
I think when we get into things, there's a hastiness to it.
Right.
I think that hastiness comes from like wanting to jump into something really quickly just because we're excited. It's
Right.
not, I don't think the intention is because they're like, yeah, we want to do things fast and we're hasty. It's just like I think we're very excited about it and we just kind of jump into it because we just want to try it out. But I think that's kind of where unknowingly there's a lot of traps and there's a lot of things that we start to experience that causes a lot of creative blocks, causes a
Right.
lot of creative blocks, causes a lot of doubt and a lot of frustration, and ultimately it can hit your confidence, you
Right.
know?
Right.
And it all comes back to why I realize at the moment I'm like, I am a student and I will
Right.
forever be okay being a student for life and witnessing these masters, right? And I know
Right.
these guys that I worked with on Avatar, I know they're so humble. They never will call themselves masters, but in my eyes, what they do was so masterful.
Right.
And I was like, I am taking notes. This is awesome. This
Oh.
is such an awesome experience. And I learned how to manage my own process. I learned
Mm-hmm.
how to approach a very difficult subject matter and not to feel obligated to approach things head on, just look at something for 2 seconds and then just open up Photoshop and start painting. I think
Right.
I feel like that's kind of like the common mistake that, you know, that I felt like I was making. I was like, I'll just go into it head first. And to see that was such a refresher. It was such a good
Mm-hmm.
reminder. I was like, it was really refreshing. It was just like, you don't have to jump into it. Let's just sit there. Let's just kind of look at it for a little bit. Let's analyze
Right.
and ask questions, you know? And then
I
once you
think.
have enough, then you
Right.
can approach it.
I think the interesting point that you brought up, because I think, and I think you can correct me if I'm wrong about this. I think the hastiness comes from us essentially just being human beings who have seen things around for so long that we take them for granted. For example, if we look at a city from a cliff and you can see multiple people walking here and there, it just registers in our head as just okay, that's just crowds and crowds of people amongst architecture, foliage, whatever. But as artists, the responsibility is to take another step back and kind of break that process down a little bit more, as to like even the fun part is that if you see someone who you're very closely related to, you don't even have to look at the person's details, but even if they're just walking against a light and you just see their shadow form walk towards you, immediately recognize it's someone that you know. And that's something
Yeah.
that's happening at a much deeper level than you would understand, because you just take that idea for granted. And as an
Yeah.
artist, you have to really take a step back and see, okay, what exactly is it the way they move? Is it the
Yeah.
way the hair's done in a certain way? Is it the body posture? Is it the way how light wraps around them? There's so many small things that we normally wouldn't take up. And I think the level of mastery that you're talking about is everyone just not getting overwhelmed with the idea that it's a complex task, and just
Yeah.
realizing, okay, every complexity starts from one small part of it and it
Yeah.
grows and
Exactly.
grows. Right.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's the difference between, you know, the some of these artists who are more seasoned, right? It's
Right.
not that they're necessarily better than you. It's just that they have more experience on dealing with situations, and that's all it
Right.
is.
Right.
Um, and that's where I was realizing I was like, ah, I'm still very new to this, and I
Mm-hmm.
want to get better. And it was inspiring
Right.
to see how they deal with certain obstacle courses or certain problems. The problem solving, not only was it like it was well executed, but it was just in the psychology, kind of in the way they approached it
Right.
was so mature, you know.
Mm-hmm.
and
That's
and
it's very impressive.
yeah, it was very, very eye-opening.
Wow. And I think at this point, because like coming to another point basically, which is your education was in a very industrial design sort of a way, where it's a lot of technical work, like technically articulated drawings, essentially blueprints in a certain way. But you have kind of garnered your aesthetic towards these beautifully painted images. And I wanted to know about the fact, because basically, okay, tracing back a little bit, I saw this work that you did for the project. I think it was one of the Planet of the Apes films,
Mm-hmm.
and that's where I saw that work being used as concept design. And I remember thinking even at that point, because with production designers like James Chinlin, his role is also to interpret a lot of the stuff which could essentially be brush strokes,
Yeah.
right? And then for him to have context about, so like, can you speak to me about how the painterly style of image making gets, discussed within a decision making sphere? Like, for example, even if you take that project as an example, uh,
Yeah.
you would be tasked to figure out certain locations, right? And James would require you to tackle certain things. And
Yeah.
essentially, you're giving illustrations. What will the conversation be with him at that point?
Yeah. So I was brought on to that project fairly early on.
Right.
This was pre-production. It was almost kind of I would say it was like the blue sky phase. So there
Hmm.
wasn't a script or anything that we were working from. It was all
Right.
purely conceptual, and it was so fun.
Right.
And the way James Chinlin, the way he managed and empowered his
Mhm.
artists and designers was, he was like, I want something inspirational.
Right.
And he wasn't too prescriptive. He wasn't
Mhm.
saying, hey, everything needs to be figured out, but give me a good feeling. It almost was like looking at he was trying to paint the whole movie
Right.
and trying to put it on Gaussian blur. Like it has to look good from a
Wow.
distance. We don't have to get
Interesting.
into the details, which was awesome as an artist because I live on, like, the brushstrokes, right? They don't
Right.
have to be as descriptive. They can be more impressionistic.
Right.
I feel that
A
that
very
is the
bold decision, actually, like thinking about it.
it's a very bold decision.
Right.
And obviously I'm an imitator. So when I was
Right.
doing those, I was looking at Jamie Jones's work. I'm like, how
Right.
would Jamie do this? I'm like, damn it, it's not working. Something's not working. But I felt that the use case of those paintings
Mhm.
was to inspire. It
Right.
was not to inform, but to inspire. I think the informative aspects come to where the images become more refined and they
Mhm.
become more specific and
Right.
detailed. And that's where, you get into production art.
Right.
I think that's one of a very important role,
Right.
but they live in two different phases. And I and I
Mhm.
and that's where I was like, whoa, this artwork, it's so inspirational. It gets everyone to have a discussion
Right.
within the team, and it allows the production designer to show the director without the director kind of getting too fixated on a detail, just to kind of look at the impression of the world,
Right.
and kind of get moved by the colors and the composition. Um, and then the director can make an informed decision on, like, okay, this is a really cool idea. Let's try to find locations for this. And that's kind of where they'll take the blue sky concept art, and then it'll go through a refinement phase where they'll try to figure out, what is this actual location?
Right.
What are these actual trees? What is this actual structure really going to be made out of?
Mhm.
And how do we make it logical but still very creative? And that's
Right.
where it it goes from inspiration to information,
Right.
and that information that gets carried over to production and whatnot. So
That's
um
very interesting.
yeah, it was a great project. I think I felt like as a painter, I felt like I was
Mhm.
able to finally utilize all the things that I was practicing,
Right.
you know. And I want to let you know, honestly, it's very it's it's like you make me sound a lot cooler than what I actually am. Yeah. With all the painterly stuff, I have a crazy imposter syndrome because
Right.
I was never a painter in my
Mhm.
earlier career as an artist.
Right.
I was always more of a technical draftsman, and so I'm
Mhm.
very comfortable with line drawings,
Right.
even though I don't really show it. But I that's kind of a lot of my foundation and background.
Right.
I got into the whole painterly stuff because of Craig Mullins and Jamie Jones. Like those are the main two artists that I looked up
Right.
to, and I still look up to them. And I remember it's funny because the questions that you ask now are the same questions that I had when I started to investigate, and when I was looking at their work. I'm like,
Mhm.
how I didn't know you can do this kind of classical looking painterly work for the film industry.
Right.
Like, it looks like a painting that I would have on my wall.
Right.
And I remember asking when I first met Jamie Jones at a workshop, I remember asking him, where do you get your inspiration from? Are there other artists that do the same stuff? And he started naming artists that I was unfamiliar with. And he started saying John Singer Sargent, Zorn, NC Wyeth, and all these people. I'm like, who are they? That's not Ryan Church. That's not Doug Chan. That's not Scott Robertson. That's not these people that do concept art. I'm like, who now? And then it started, I went back and I was asking at the time, my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, I was like, have you heard of these artists? And she's like, I think I've heard of John Singer Sargent. I think he's a classical artist. And so we went to a nearby, we went to a library nearby a school because they didn't really have much stuff online at the time. If they did, I probably wasn't looking in the proper areas. And we saw these books, these like really thick, like large format John Singer Sargent books of portraits, and the instant connection I made, I was like, whoa,
Right.
This looks like Jamie Jones's work right here.
Right.
And then I was like, wait, Jamie Jones is looking at this guy's work right here.
Right.
It's crazy. And then that's when it clicked. And I remember looking at this work, and I was telling my wife at the time, or then girlfriend, I was like, I never appreciated their work because I didn't understand it.
Right.
And because I didn't understand it, I didn't appreciate it. I didn't really care for it. It felt very, I don't know, something that maybe my grandparents would like, it just kind of felt like it just was like, who wants to look at portraits of like old, like, people from the past? I was like, yeah, I don't know. It's not like robots and like cool destruction, whatever. And I was like, what is this? But then I fell in love with what was behind the image, which was the artistry, the calligraphy, the brushstrokes, the decision making. And I was looking at that going, wait, that brushstroke right there, that is very similar, and it resembles kind of what I'm seeing in Jamie's work and why I like his work. I'm like, and I couldn't explain it. I was like, it feels so classical, and I don't know what it is. And I was like, oh, because he's essentially looking at classical artists, and that's what he's trying to capture, is that feeling. And I was like, oh, dude, this is awesome. It makes sense now. This all makes sense. And so that's kind of where my painting journey really started. Is I had a mood board, and obviously it was just Jamie Jones and Craig Mullin's work, and I started asking myself, what are they looking at? Often while I was like, what brush are they using? I gotta have their brush. And I did get Jamie Jones's brush, but my paintings didn't look like Jamie Jones. Like someone else. It looked like it's just like a blobby mess. It's just like you get a painting, you just do this. It was so bad. I was like, wait, it has to be in the tools. Like, what brush did he use? And I was like, oh, it's actually not the brush. It's in the principles. It's in the fundamentals and the idea behind mark making and alla prima and all this stuff. And that's when I took a fascination and interest in studying more classical artists. And that's kind of where my love and journey started, really. And when I started doing these copies of John Singer Sargent, and I felt it was way too hard for me. I was like, damn it, this is hard. Like, it's time consuming, and it's very like, I can't do characters. So I started kind of going back, and I started studying Edgar Payne, who was doing landscapes. And there was another artist named Bill Anton, who does like these cowboys and landscapes. And I was copying the loose sketches, and I was like, okay, I think I can copy this and emulate this because it's loose enough and it seems simple enough. And that's kind of where my journey started as a painter, I guess. Wow. And I got addicted, man. I was addicted.
This is exactly what this conversation is exactly what excites me so much. And it's because I love discussing philosophies more than the final mark that the canvas has. So and that's why when I started my journey in this field, like I'll give you like a small blurb of like why your work and Jamie and Craig's work resonates with me so much, is because I remember looking at classical painting books when I was 5 or 6 years old, because that's all the books that my dad used to have.
Yeah.
And as a kid, I was fascinated by magic or sleight of hand, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And he used to have these books where they used to literally take a painting and break down the symbolism of that painting. So work by Caravaggio, work by Da Vinci, work by numerous masters. And the books would have basically these paintings set up in a way there would be small thought bubbles which would annotate a certain part of the image and talk about why the artist made that choice. And that is exactly what I thought what being an artist meant. Then the journey came to like learning, like getting interested about films, but then film concept design at that point had a certain look to it,
Mm-hmm.
which because I think a lot of us had done the whole default Google search, just go Google search concept art, and you will see like some, like it would be generic but incredible looking stuff. But
Yeah. Yeah.
then when I think Craig's work was the first one that I got exposed to, and through that I couldn't understand their work too much. But I realized like, okay, I love this, but I don't know how to even have even like 20% of this in my work. And then I started seeing Jamie's work, and I got even more confused because at least with
Yeah.
Craig's work, the remaining brush strokes at least give you some level of an understanding as to what he's trying to
Yeah.
do. Jamie
Yeah.
is very good at covering that up. That
Yes.
makes it more confusing.
Yeah.
When I was in that phase, that's when your work appeared to me. It almost like the journey kind of led me to different people, and your work and your courses kind of brought me to that point where I started understanding how you break things down. And I started following
Oh,
that process. Immediately, I saw changes in how I paint and how I think.
oh wow, that's awesome.
So that helped me on so many levels. And now listening to you about your philosophy is towards like really figuring out ways, like simplifying steps for yourself, or like the reason why I started liking Craig much more, like so much more, is because of his interest in non-artistic things such as history, politics, understanding other things, understanding gardening at some level,
Yeah.
and those things
Yeah.
kind of seeping into his work. So I started studying history and understanding, and it just made the whole creative process so much more fruitful. And I feel like that's something like you guys have brought so much value to, and that's something that gets a little missed out on, like if you don't have mentors, essentially. Like
Yeah.
we have so much information available at this point, like courses here and there, but it's such a direct point towards, okay, you want to know how to use Blender, okay, these are the tutorials. But what would I make out of a software, a free software that would make someone sit and think, wow, like they would forget about what tools were used, but they just sit and look at it
Yeah.
the way you'll
Yeah.
have the whole art gallery experience looking at a sergeant's painting for hours, and you won't feel like moving. You know what has been used for this, but you still can't like avert your gaze from that.
Yeah.
That's the feeling that I get from your work as well.
Oh
So
wow. Thank you.
this has
Thank you.
been, yeah. I had a few more questions, like simpler ones. I wanted to know about, because you wear so many hats at this point, right? So managing time is a tricky thing in
Yeah.
general. I remember asking my dad about time management, and his quick and pretty interesting answer was, "There's nothing as time management. It's just understanding time mismanagement. Just taking a chance to sit and understand what is not allowing you to use your time in the right way." So I wanted to
I
know how
That
you
is a
think about
very
it.
wise man. Your dad is a very wow. I love that. It's not managing time, is time is management.
Right.
Love that. I I think I think for me, and I get asked this a lot because not because I'm doing anything, amazing or anything. I just think that, I'm I feel that I've turned it into a routine
Mhm.
on the things that I do. And that's the way I like to explain time management, is that um it's a routine. Everything's a routine,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Waking up is a routine, you know, brushing your teeth, getting breakfast, turning on your computer, everything's a routine. Um, Even socializing is a routine,
Of
even though
course.
it's a very enjoyable experience, but it's part of your life routine.
Right.
And the way I was able to incorporate all the things in my life is I try to turn it into a routine. And the question that was asked often was, how do you manage your time to do personal work?
Right.
And that's a hard one, right? Because when it comes to personal work, it's a very daunting feeling and experience, especially when you open up Photoshop or Procreate, got this big, large canvas, and you're like,
Right.
what do I paint today?
Right.
And and it's hard. It's hard to kind of get into it. But I started switching my mindset, and I gave myself a routine. I said, I have 30 minutes to an hour today.
Mhm.
I'm just gonna just draw and paint and do things. It doesn't matter if it's gonna look good or bad.
Right.
I just want to make sure I'm giving myself my own personal time that's not related to work, that's not related to anything commercial,
Right.
and I'm just gonna do it for me. And the first couple times it was very uneventful. It's not inspiring. You're just like, what am I doing?
Mhm.
But I kept it up for about a week,
Right.
and it becomes a part of your routine. And when it becomes a part of your routine, then I started figuring out during that time, now that I'm used to it, I'm used to kind of getting up earlier in the morning, allocating 30 minutes, just to start off. Now I'm starting to ask, like, okay, I'm kind of doing these things that aren't that great, but what do I want to start learning slowly?
Right.
And I started just doing painting, like simple paintings. I'm like, oh, I'm gonna just try to use, just these brushes, and I'll paint the subject matter. And I have a lot of paintings that I don't share and post because
Mhm.
they're just, again, the whole social media thing is like a different component where I think
Right.
a lot of people always want to see the cool final product.
Mhm.
But for me, it was about, I want to stay productive and consistent, but I want to do it for me in a way that's it's really to kind of provide, you know, good, healthy nutrition for myself,
Right.
and it felt like doing like morning exercises for myself to keep my muscles strong,
Right.
focus on the ones that are a little bit underdeveloped. And so like I would just do these paintings. Like I was painting trees for a long time,
Mhm.
and I would actually paint a lot of the same images over and over again. And it was very therapeutic, and it got me into a really good rhythm where doing personal work became less daunting.
Right. Right.
And so that helped me to get better at managing my time for personal work. Now, when it comes to studio work, obviously, I try to be a responsible employee, and I allocate, 9 to 6. I'm just only focused on studio work. Um, I have a family, so I have a daughter and a son, so I need to be a responsible parent and a
Right.
husband, so I allocate time for family time as well. And before going to bed, not always, sometimes it gets switched out with either, playing video games
Right.
or painting. But I
Right.
try to make that a routine where like I
Mhm.
at least try to end the night with something for myself.
Right.
And I try not to go overboard, but let's say if my night ends at 11 p.m. or something, 10 or 11 p.m., because my kids are asleep and everything,
Right.
I'll sneak into my office and I'll turn on my computer, and then I'll tell my wife, "Oh, I'm just doing emails," but I'm actually opening Photoshop. I'm like,
Right.
"What can I paint today?
Right.
What can I try out?" Um, and and it's just to do something for myself,
Right. I'm so
and
glad
it
you
doesn't have,
said that because
yeah.
I don't know if you subscribe to this idea as well, but once you finish work for someone else, you might be thinking that you will have lesser energy to do things, but you actually feel even more energetic to do some
More
at least
energy.
something for yourself. It's
More
just because
energy.
it's
Yeah.
almost like just like having dessert at the end of the day in a
Exactly.
certain way.
It's exactly. It's like you eat a big meal and you're like, oh,
Right.
I'm so full, and then someone's like, I have ice cream. You're like, oh, I'll take some. It's like,
Yeah.
where's your stomach broken up? Like, it's impossible. Like, how are you able to eat more? And it just
Right,
you're able
exactly.
to, yeah. If you find something that you enjoy, you're able to make time for it, right?
Right.
And so, I think that's what it was. Is like I've been, instead of trying to do things that are things that I don't like, I'll try to, you know, slowly condition myself to make it a part of my routine. So
Right.
I know doing personal work can be really tricky, especially for us artists, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we're working, sometimes you're tired and you're just not feeling motivated.
Right.
But when you get into it and you know it's for yourself, and you don't have to show anybody, I think
Right.
that's the part that's good.
Right.
Don't feel obligated to show anybody. It takes this weird pressure, and like there's because it takes the pressure off of off of you. Suddenly it's a lot lighter and it's a lot easier. It's easygoing, and you start to feel inspired again.
Right.
And that's kind of where I fell in love with doing art in a different way.
Right.
And it wasn't like, oh, I'm doing more art so I can get more work, or I want to earn more money, or I want to get more likes or anything like that. It was just, I just want to get better, and I enjoy it, and if I die tomorrow, I'll be happy knowing that I got to do the things that I love,
Mm-hmm.
and I got to experience my life in this world, and I felt like I spent it, very wisely and very creatively for myself, you
Right.
know. So that's something that I felt like that's my definition of time management, you
Wow.
know?
Wow.
So yeah, I hope that answers that part of the
That
question.
definitely does. And what you said actually so beautifully blended with what Satish had told me as well about time management. His whole ideology about time has always been to find this organic balance throughout the day, where no one thing takes up so much control of your life that you feel that this is an obligation and not a choice at the end of the day for you.
Yeah.
Right. So
Yeah.
even if you're doing professional work, it should not become, this is something that I feel that I'm the biggest perpetrator of, where I completely misalign the expectations for myself, and one day is just working almost 16 to 17 hours on professional work and no time for myself, and some days I'm so burnt out that I have to only do my own thing. That has been my biggest flaw. And listening to you and Satish as well, it teaches me a lot about how to find that beautiful, that simple naturalistic balance, to
Yeah.
just to be able to allow yourself to wake up tomorrow and do this shenanigan all over again from
Yeah,
start to
exactly.
start to
And
end.
and and that's what it is, right? It's like you want to wake up the next morning and do it again.
Right.
And but you don't want to like what was it? There was someone else explained it in a really elegant way too. They said, I don't want to sprint. I want
Mhm.
to casually and calmly run.
Right.
Or it's a marathon, right? It's not a
Right.
it's not a rat race. Because when you do a rat race, you're just you're
Right.
running and you're trying to get to the end. But a marathon is, no, this is just who you are, and this is the pacing that you like. And so
Mhm.
I remember someone was asking me, how do you teach and do all this stuff? Well, I'll tell you, even that was like a big learning experience. I I would teach on the weekends, and I love
Mhm.
teaching, but
Right.
I did it in a way where it burned me out at times, where I would teach these long days. They're
Mhm.
5 to 7 hours, both Saturday and Sunday.
Right.
And afterwards, I always found myself falling asleep. I'd go downstairs and I'm
Wow.
like, whoo, that was a long session, and my voice hurts, and I'm like, I don't want to hear myself talk. And I would just burn out. And I was like, oh man. But to your point, Ian, it became less enjoyable. It became like an obligation.
Right. Right. Right.
And so I did this thing this past semester where I was like, oh, if I'm gonna teach, I'd rather teach not big chunks, but I'd rather teach every single day. and just little spurts at a time. And so in my own mentorship, I meet with a student, at least one or two students every single night
Wow. Okay.
for about 2 to 2.5 hours.
Right.
And that's been amazing because turned it into a routine. So
Right.
every single day I get to meet with my students, and it's casual. It's like just like how you and I are talking and hanging out. I get to like demo and stuff and answer questions and have creative discussions, but it became less than an obligation. It became more of it, like it reignited that feeling of like, this is not an obligation.
Right.
I'm doing this because I love to do it. And I love to problem solve and have just open discussions and really excite the students, show them something that to them it feels new and it feels like a magic trick, but it's like for me, I'm like, I've been doing this for a while, and I'm like, oh, you could do this with this layer, and they're like, and I'm like, awesome, so take it away and do it. I'll see you tomorrow, and so it's like that became an everyday routine, just like doing personal work. Turn it into a routine. Don't do these huge 15-16 hour days of personal work, because you'll get burned out. Because in your head now that becomes like, shit, if I do personal work, I got to spend the entire day. It's like, no. Spend 30 minutes, because I did dread when I was teaching those long hours. I was like, oh, Saturday and Sunday's coming. I'm gonna dread it. This is gonna suck. Even though I loved it, I was like, but part of me, I'm like, oh, this is gonna not be good. It's gonna be a long day. But I look forward to it every single day now. It's weird because the amount of hours that I teach hasn't changed, but the pacing, the balance, like you're saying about what you talked about with Satish, that changed. It became more of an organic. It's like you're not trying to force it.
Right. Yeah, because I think also our bodies have this beautiful ability to accept something which falls into certain patterns where it feels effortless after a point. There must be that initial bar of resistance within yourself, but that breaks fairly quickly if you just ignore the voices in the head for like just a few days, essentially.
Exactly. And it's true for even normal work, right? Like studio work, where pacing, it's all about pacing. And I think a lot of folks learn it in different ways, and some folks learn it the hard way, where they'll go to a studio and they will just crank. They'll grind and they'll do a lot of work, and then they'll get burned out. And a lot of people are like, oh, it's like, maybe the project's too hard. It's like, no, it's not. It's just the pacing is off, where there's a lot of work being done at one given time. And naturally your body's going to want to just stop. It's like, I don't want to do this right now. I need a break. Right. So you just kind of don't have that energy. But I feel that, managing and controlling the pacing allows you to continue a healthy balance, but a healthy momentum, even on your day job, and I feel like that's a very important thing, to learn. I think that's something that artists will learn kind of through experience. But that's something that I wish I told myself when I was younger. I was like, hey, not everything's a rat race. Learn how to be more consistent and constant. Not don't do like one big flood of work, So
and then just stop working for the next few months.
That happens. There's days, like you said, like, drawing and painting for 15, 16, 17 hours. And then the next day, can you do it again? No, I just want to just slouch on the TV and watch HBO Max, or I don't know, watch movies or play video games the whole day, because I'm just like mentally burnt out, right? So, but yeah, it's really about pacing, and again, my definition, it's really about a good routine.
Well, I would say something that you mentioned that makes me feel when you were talking about your decision to kind of separate out your time, like providing few hours every day to your students? You said I get to sit with my students rather than I have to sit with my students. That's such a
Yeah.
green flag for your students as well, to know that there's a teacher who's teaching them and actually enjoying the opportunity to impart that knowledge. So your students are very lucky to have you as an instructor with them. Your employers are very lucky to have you as an employee for them.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. Like, I'll ask you a final simple question, because you said you have kids as well, and someday they'll also grow up and they will probably want to be a part of this industry as well. What do you think your initial fair advice would be for them? Because the industry changes fairly quickly. What are the
Yeah.
some of the human principles you would want them to have in case they want to become artists in this industry?
I would 100% support it. I
Mm-hmm.
know, I mean, my daughter is 8, so
Mm-hmm.
she's getting to an age where she's starting to have preferences and things that she really likes and things that she
Right.
doesn't. My son is almost 2 years old, so he's
Oh
still pretty
wow.
young.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a pretty big age gap, and
Right.
it's interesting development. Um, but for me, I I tell my daughter, because I think maybe it's just the way I grew up. I said, don't worry about comparing yourself to other people.
Mm-hmm.
Don't worry about school. We obviously want you to try hard,
Right.
but it's not everything. You
Mm.
know, find the thing that you enjoy the most.
Right.
So she loves playing video games, like
Mm-hmm.
every kid does. And she loves playing Minecraft, and she likes building like little levels and like
Ah.
little like buildings and stuff. I was like, oh, do you like this? And she's like, yeah, Dad, like I really enjoy it. And I was like, this is cool. So I just
Right.
kind of like watch her, play it for a couple weeks to a couple months. I'm like, oh
Right.
wow, like and she'll show me like this is what I built. And
Right.
I'm like, wow, you're getting really good at this stuff. And then so in our in our in our neighborhood, we have this like this place called Code Ninja. It's like a
Mm-hmm.
coding school for kids. But I
Right.
looked at it, I was like, is it like learning programming, like hardcore programming, like C++ or like Python or something?
Right.
And I looked at it, I was like it's more of a fun version where they get to learn how to build their own games and build their own
Right.
levels and get more do a deeper dive with the things that they're already kind of surrounding themselves with, right? Like
Right.
Minecraft and Roblox. So I'm like, oh wow, I saw that. So I took my daughter there, and she instantly fell in love. Just instantly. She
Oh.
was like, I love it. And she's not the type to do that, because
Mm-hmm.
as parents, we're like, oh, do you want to do soccer? You want to go outside? She's like, no, I want to stay home and play games or do this thing. But when she looks forward to it every single week, she's like,
Wow.
okay, after school, I'm gonna come home. You gotta take me. And I was like, okay. So that's part of my routine too.
Right.
Every twice a week, I gotta go take her, and she spends time there. But I
Mhm.
get to see her passionate about something,
Right.
and I'm sure that will change and evolve.
Mm-hmm.
They're still very young. But for me as a parent, I get to at least help instill and help them find and discover their passion. And I want to
Right.
be the supportive parent where I don't want to dictate and tell them this is what you have to do.
Mm-hmm.
I want to be the parent where I can say, what do you want to do? And do you want to try it out?
Right.
And how can I support you with that? You know?
Wow.
And and uh and that's it. That's it for me. Like that's the legacy I want to leave behind. So if she wants to become an artist, I want to support her and help her be very inspired by it. And our industry is going to change.
Right.
As you know, like there's a surge of AI and all this other crazy stuff that's happening.
Mm.
I have my own opinions about it, and but I feel that no matter what, there will always be a place for in the world of the
Right.
things that you want to do. You
Right.
know,
Right.
and you just have to be passionate about it and let it be a part of who you are. Don't force it, you know? And that's kind of where you'll find the best of everything, where you find happiness and you find success.
Right. It's very beautifully put. Thank you so much, John. Thank you for your time. As I said, this is one of my milestones as well, just getting the
Oh
chance to
man.
sit and talk to you.
You're too nice,
Uh,
Ian.
no, no,
Thank you.
definitely, John. Like this means the world to me. I hope to meet you in person at some point as well.
Yeah,
That would be really, really fun as well.
that'll be awesome.
And also like on a personal level, I before every interview, I feel very anxious. With you, I felt none of those things, which is a
That's
great
awesome.
sign for me because I like there was a certain beautiful comfort zone that I felt with the with how we have been speaking on and off via Instagram. So just listening to you as a brother essentially that helped me really ease into conversation with you. So I'm so happy. I feel very lucky to have you in my life as well. So thank you for
Oh
your
wow.
time.
Thank you, Ian, for reaching out and connecting. I have Satish to thank. He's my brother as well.
Shout out to
He's super
Satish.
inspiring, and yeah, Satish is amazing, man. Inspiring. Um, and I'm just glad I got to meet you, Ian, because your work is incredible. I can
Oh, that
tell
means the world to me.
just you as a person, you're doing something that's very important, man. And please continue to do everything for the community and for yourself. Like this is there's not many people that's willing to, you know, help build and foster a strong art community. I think if anything, we need it more than ever,
Right,
especially
right.
with all the tech and everything that's coming our way. I think a lot of people are getting very worried, and I
Mhm.
think that we need this, right?
Right.
Um, and anytime you want to connect, and I apologize for the time difference. I know that
Oh,
you're
absolutely. Don't worry about it.
uh, I'd love to do this again. It was awesome just to talk with another fellow artist and to share you know stories and stuff. And I'd love to hear your story. I
Definitely.
don't want it to be about me. I'd love to hear how you see the world, how you
Mhm.
interpret art, and what gets you inspired and what gets you excited.
I'm really, really looking forward to that conversation.